Joining us now, Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey. He's a Democrat. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So, Senator, what do you think of this sudden resignation? What impact will it have on American foreign policy?
Well, first, I want to thank her for her service to our country. She clearly is committed to service, and we thank her for that. But at the same time, a new nominee for this very important job of ambassador to the United Nations will give us a chance to review the Trump administration's views on the critical issues facing the planet. Number one, over the weekend, the United Nations issued an absolutely scary report about how much more dangerous the threat of climate change, global warming, is to our planet, and the fact that the actions which we're taking as a planet are not sufficient, and clearly the United States is not any longer the leader but the laggard, because not only did the president but Nikki Haley defended the decision to pull out of the Paris agreement. The same thing is true for our North Korea policy, where thus far there have been no meaningful concessions in terms of dismantlement of their nuclear program that have been conceded by Kim. And just for one other example, in Burma, there is a mass extermination that is taking place of the Rohingya, and while the administration says the right things, we still haven't taken the concrete steps we need to in order to assert American moral leadership to protect upwards of 1 million people who have been evicted from their country.
You'll have to go through all those issues during a confirmation process of hearings that will take place before your committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'm sure you'll raise all those issues with the nominee. Some colleagues of yours on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, they've already started thinking about who might replace Nikki Haley. And in fact, you've seen all the media speculation, one name being floated, Ivanka Trump, as a possible replacement. What do you think of the president's daughter as possibly the next U.S. ambassador to the UN?
It's impossible for me or anyone to get inside of the workings of Donald Trump's brain, what he might be thinking. So I think it's wise for everyone, rather than engaging in rampant speculation, to wait until he actually nominates someone, and then we can begin the deliberation over that person's credentials, that person's qualifications to have the job of United Nations ambassador.
He says he'll make an announcement within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Let's see if that happens. Let's turn, Senator, while I have you, to the midterm elections. Now exactly 4 weeks away, early voting already starting in some places. As you know, the House Speaker, Paul Ryan, says the battle over Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh is making a big difference for voters. Listen to this.
It's still 29 days away, which this day and age is a long time. I think the analysis that the Republican base is very much activated as a result of this. I think the Democrat base was already there. So I think, if anything, in the wash of it all, this is definitely, I could just see it just from traveling around the country in the last few days, traveling around Wisconsin. The Republican base is definitely animated after this. I
assume you agree, right?
It's not as galvanized as the Democratic base. It's not as galvanized as those who were outraged at the way in which Dr. Blasey Ford was treated before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and then in the entire process of the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. I think what we're seeing here is an historic uprising, especially of women in our country, who really do feel that this president has to have a check be placed upon him. Otherwise, pre-existing conditions, which are protections for those who have health care needs with pre-existing conditions, or the entire Affordable Care Act, or Roe versus Wade, can all just be swept away, can be completely overturned by Brett Kavanaugh's vote on the Supreme Court. So this is going to be a referendum on Donald Trump, on Brett Kavanaugh, on the key votes which he can now cast, that absolutely undermines protections for women in our country, but for families in general.
President Trump says the claims against Justice Kavanaugh were all a Democratic Party hoax. In hindsight, would you change how Democrats handled this entire confirmation battle?
Donald Trump is, I think, in a small minority of people who think that Dr. Blasey Ford's accusations were a hoax. I think she was highly credible. I think that across this country, people know that she was sincere, that she was absolutely fearless in coming forward, even though there would be huge negative consequences for her personally. So I think the real hoax now that is attempting to be perpetrated is one by Donald Trump that is now going to contend that there was nothing to any of these accusations that were made about Brett Kavanaugh. And I think the American people know, who watched that process very closely over a 2-week period, knows that that is not the case. He does not have the judicial temperament nor the credibility to serve on the Supreme Court. And I think that is going to be the single most powerful animating force for the next 28 days in this election. All across this country, there is an uprising of people who will get to the polls. We lost when we should not have lost, and there's nothing more motivating than that in politics.
Senator Markey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.